Hey everyone, welcome back to the JavaScript After Work series. In this video, I'll be working on a silly story generator. Before I begin, on the last JavaScript After Work video, I got this question. It says, "Hi, I would like to know which theme VS Code that used." To answer this question, I'm using the Dracula official theme, and it's my favorite VS Code theme. I love how the colors pop against the darker background, and I've been using this theme for quite a while. All right, so on to the silly story project. This is what the silly story generator looks like. Nothing too fancy, but the objective is to get it working to generate a silly story when you click the button. So it's a fun exercise to practice various fundamental JavaScript knowledge. And here is the assessment that I'll be completing. It's on MDN's website, and the assessment is from the JavaScript First Steps module. And this section actually covers a lot of the fundamental topics on JavaScript. And I've already gone through these articles and gone through the guides. And so with every section in this course, it provides you with a way to practice everything you've learned. And that's what I'll be doing here. So in this assessment section, they have this silly story generator in which you're tasked to take a lot of that knowledge and practice. So yeah, that's what I'll be doing here in this exercise / project / assessment. It says, in this assessment, you'll be tasked with taking some of the knowledge you've picked up in this module's articles and applying it to creating a fun app that generates random silly stories. Have fun. And the prerequisites before attempting this assessment, you should have already worked through all the articles in this module. Objective to test comprehension of JavaScript fundamentals such as variables, numbers, operators, strings, and arrays. And below that is the starting point, and I've already completed these steps. To get the assessment started, you should go and grab the HTML file for the example, save a local copy of it as index.html in a new directory somewhere on your computer, and do the assessment locally to begin with. This also has the CSS to style the example contained within it. And then also go to the page containing the raw text and keep this open in a separate browser tab somewhere. You'll need it later. And this is what the files look like. So this is the HTML file in a GitHub repo. So it's this file, and then it is the page containing the raw text. So I already have these files locally in my code editor, the index.html file and the file containing the raw text. So down a little bit more, there is the project brief, and it says you have been provided with some raw HTML/CSS and a few text strings and JavaScript functions. You need to write the necessary JavaScript to turn this into a working program, which does the following. Generates a silly story when the generate random story button is pressed. Replaces the default name Bob in the story with a custom name, only if a custom name is entered into the enter custom name text field before the generate button is pressed. Converts the default US weight and temperature quantities and units in the story into UK equivalents if the UK radio button is checked before the generate button is pressed. Generates a new random silly story every time the button is pressed. The following screenshot shows an example of what the finished program should output. So this is an example output once the code is working. So when a user enters a custom name, select US or UK, whichever version, and then generate random story, and then it should print out the story. And then below that, they give the steps to complete. So I'll be working through these steps to get this up and running. Scrolling down just a little bit more, they also give some hints and tips to help out with this assessment, just kind of giving some pointers like you don't need to edit the HTML in any way, only the JavaScript. Well, you're applying the JavaScript to your HTML, If you're unsure whether the JavaScript is applied to your HTML properly, you can use this code, which turns the background of the HTML element red. So the entire browser window should go red if the JavaScript is applied properly. And then it talks about math.round, that it's a built-in JavaScript method that rounds the result of a calculation to the nearest whole number. And then it also talks about the replace method, because there are 3 instances of strings that need to be replaced. You may repeat the replace method multiple times, or you can use replace all. Okay, starting from the top with basic setup, it says to create a new file called main.js in the same directory as your index.html file. So I'll do that now. And now main.js is created in the same directory as index.html. Then it says apply the external JavaScript file to your HTML by inserting a script element into your HTML referencing main.js. Put it just before the closing body tag. So I'll open the index.html file and then add in the script tag just below the closing body tag. So here's the closing body tag, and I'll add in the script tag here. And then now I'll put in the source for the script, which is main.js. And by the way, if I were to run index.html right now, it does load the user interface. However, there's no functionality right now, and so I'll be working through this to build the functionality so that it generates the random story. So the basic setup is now complete. The JavaScript file is now applied to the HTML file. The next step is initial variables and functions, and it says in the raw text file, copy all of the code underneath the heading 1 complete variable and function definitions and paste it into the top of the main.js file. This gives you 3 variables that store references to the enter custom name text field, custom name, the generate random story button, randomize, and the P element at the bottom of the HTML body that the story will be copied into story, respectively. In addition, you've got a function called random value from array that takes an array and returns one of the items stored inside the array at random. So I'll open the raw text file and copy the variable and function definitions here and paste it into the top of main.js. So next it says for number 2, now look at the second section of the raw text file, 2 raw text strings. This contains text strings that will act as input into our program. We'd like you to contain these inside variables inside main.js. So it says store the first big long string of text inside a variable called story text. Store the first set of 3 strings inside an array called insert x. Store the second set of 3 strings inside an array called insert y. Store the third set of 3 strings inside an array called insert z. What I'll do first is create the variables in the main.js file. So first, story text, and then insert x, insert y, and then insert z. Now I'll set the specified values for each variable. So story text will store a long string of text. So I'll copy that from the raw text file. So here is the long string of text. So I'll copy this and update the value of story text to equal this string. And now for insert x, this will store an array of 3 strings. So I'll go ahead and set the value of insert x to an array. And now I'll grab the values and paste into the array. I'll update these to the proper array formatting. And now insert y, which will also store an array of 3 strings. So I'll set the value to an array as well. And grab the values. Paste into the array and update the formatting. Lastly, insert z also has an array of 3 strings. So I'll set this value to an array and grab the values. And update the formatting. And now these 4 variables are created in the code. In the next section, placing the event handler and incomplete function. It says now return to the raw text file, copy the code found underneath the heading 3 event listener and partial function definition, and paste it into the bottom of your main.js file. This adds a click event listener to the randomized variable so that when the button it represents is clicked, the result function is run, adds a partially completed result function definition to your code. For the remainder of the assessment, you'll be filling in lines inside this function to complete it and make it work properly. So going back to the text file, I'll copy the code under event listener and partial function definition. And now paste it at the bottom of main.js. And then the next section is completing the result function. By the way, for testing purposes, I've set up a file called test.js as well here, and it contains the random value from array function from main.js, as well as the variables and the result function. The result function on this test page is empty so that I can easily isolate and test different changes that I'm making to the code. So on the main.js file, it does have code in the function, but again, this is just for testing so that I can put code in here and easily test it as I move along. Okay, so completing the result function, it says, create a new variable called newStory and set its value to equal story text. This is needed so we can create a new random story each time the button is pressed and the function is run. If we made changes directly to story text, we'd only be able to generate a new story once. So back to main.js. In the result function, I'll create the new story variable. And now set the value to equal story text. And as a reminder, the story text variable was set earlier, so it's the long string of text, aka the story. I'll also add this new change to the result function in my test.js file. So in my empty test function, I'll paste that here, the new variable, and I'll have it return the new story variable. And below that, I'll add in a console log. and I'll have this invoke the result function to get the output. So now I'll run this, and I can see that the new story variable is outputting the value stored in story text. So next it says create 3 new variables called X item, Y item, and Z item, and make them equal to the result of calling random value from array on your 3 arrays. The result in each case will be a random item out of each array it is called on. For example, you can call the function and get it to return 1 random string out of insert X by writing random value from array insert X. So in main.js, I'll create the 3 new variables in the result function. So first X item, and then Y item, and then Z item. And now I'll set the value for each of them to equal the random value from array function, which is here. So I'll set these to that. And then the parameters for each will need to be the corresponding array as the source to grab a random value. So for X item, the corresponding array is insert X. So I'll insert that variable as the parameter for this one. For Y item, it's insert Y for the parameter. And then for Z item, it's insert Z for the parameter. So now when these variables are used, the random value from array function will run, and then the random item will be given based on the provided array. So I'll add these new variables to my test.js file as well. And what I'll do is test out each of the variables. So each should output a random value from whichever array is being passed as the parameter in the random value from array function assigned to each of them. I'll start with returning X item, which is associated with the insert X array. And I'm already console logging the result function. So now I'll run this, and I can see that it shows a value from the insert X array, and I'll run it a few times. And I can see that it's outputting random values from that array. So I'll test Y item and Z item as well. So I'll start with Y item. And I can see that it's outputting a value from the insert Y array. So now I'll run it a couple more times, and I can see random values. And now Z item, run result function again, and I can see a value, and then run a couple more times, and it is returning random values. So I've confirmed that these changes are working properly. So next it says for number 3, next we want to replace the 3 placeholders in the new story string, insert X, insert Y, and insert Z, with the string stored in X item, Y item, and Z item. There are 2 possible string methods that will help you here. In each case, make the call to the method equal to new story. So each time it is called, new story is made equal to itself, but with substitutions made. So each time the button is pressed, these placeholders are replaced with a random silly string. As a further hint, depending on the method you choose, you might need to make one of the calls twice. So again, the new story string is set to story text, and story text again is this value. And in this value, the 3 placeholders need to be replaced with the appropriate variables that are storing the array items, which will be the random values for the generator. And again, the placeholders are insert X, which is here. So that's insert X, which is there twice. And then there's insert Y, that's another placeholder. And then there's insert Z, which is the other placeholder. So in the result function, I'll target the new story variable and I'll set the value to equal new story. Now I'll set up the replacements for insert X, insert Y, and insert Z. I'll be using the replace method. And as a note, the replace method of string values returns a new string with one, some, or all matches of a pattern replaced by a replacement. And the syntax is replace, and it takes 2 parameters, the pattern and the replacement. The pattern can be a string or an object with a symbol.replace method. Replacement can be a string or a function. The return value is a new string with one, some, or all matches of the pattern replaced by the specified replacement. So I'll start with the insert X placeholder. However, since it's in the value twice, I'll actually use the replace all method instead. It says, unlike replace, this method would replace all occurrences of a string, not just the first one. So the parameters are the same, it's just using replace all instead of replace for the keyword. So in the value of new story, I'll add in the replace all method. And the first parameter will be that placeholder from the story text variable. So this substring here, insert X. So this will be my first parameter, which is the pattern. And for the second parameter, it will be the variable X item, which is the replacement. And again, since I'm using the replace all method, it will replace both occurrences of insert X here in that string. So it'll replace it here and here as well. I'll now create replacements for the other 2 placeholders. So one for insert Y and one for insert Z. And since there's just one of each of these, I'll use the replace method instead of replace all. First, I'm going to chain the replace method twice into this value. So here's my first replace, the second replace. And for better readability, I'm putting the replacements on different lines. Now I'll add in the placeholders to be replaced. So the first is insert Y. And then insert Z. And now they're replacements. So insert Y. The replacement is the Y item variable. And insert Z. The replacement is the Z item variable. Now I'll add this new change to my test.js file as well. In test.js, I'd like to check that the replacements are working and that the placeholders insert X, insert Y, and insert Z no longer display in the story, but instead the associated array values display, and that there are different array values outputting each time the story generates. For readability in the test, I'm going to add brackets around the placeholders in the story text variable to make it easier to see that these values are being replaced once I generate the story. So I'll add a bracket here around insert X, and then insert Y, insert Z, and then the other insert X. So I'm gonna scroll down back to the result function, and I'll add a console log here so that the output shows the story with the placeholder first. And I'm gonna put some spacing in this console log because I want there to be, well, first I want a new story to be on a new line from this text. So I'm just adding a little bit of spacing. And now I'll update the return statement to the new story variable, which will output the new assignment here containing the replacements. So I'll update this, and I'm gonna add in new story for the text. And I do want new story, the value of that to show on a new line. So I'm putting that on a new line, the variable. So I'll run the result function again, this console log. And I can see the before and after. The before is the placeholder story, and after is the new story. I can see the before with the placeholders, and I can also see the new changes are making the replacements. Again, by adding the brackets, it makes it easier for me to see where to look. So in the new story, I can see the different array values in place. So here I see Father Christmas, the White House turned into a slug and crawled away. So that confirms that the replacements are happening. So what I'll do is run this a few times to confirm that it's generating a new story each time. And so I had it output 3 different times so I can see the 3 different tests. So the first test, I can see the new values, Willie the Goblin, the White House, spontaneously combusted. So it was 94 Fahrenheit outside. So Willie the Goblin went for a walk. When they got to the White House, they stared in horror for a few moments, then spontaneously combusted. Ouch. Bob saw the whole thing but was not surprised. Willie the Goblin weighs 300 pounds and it was a hot day. And then I'll go down to the second test. We have Big Daddy went for a walk. When they got to the White House, and then spontaneously combusted. And then Big Daddy weighs 300 pounds. And then here is the third test. Father Christmas went for a walk. When they got to Disneyland, they stared in horror for a few moments, then spontaneously combusted. Father Christmas weighs 300 pounds. So it's generating the different array values properly. And it also seems like everybody's like spontaneously combusting, so I hope this is not a true story. So yeah, I'd like to try running it one more time to get a different result besides spontaneously combusted. So I'll do that again. Okay, great. So they stared in horror for a few moments, then turned into a slug and crawled away. Okay, great. I feel much better that they turned into a slug rather than spontaneously combusted. All right, moving on. So this step is now complete, and on to the next step. So number 4, it says inside the first if block, add another string replacement method call to replace the name Bob found in the new story string with the name variable. In this block, we are saying if a value has been entered into the custom name text input, replace Bob in the story with that custom name. So back to the code and back to main.js. In the story text variable, the default name is Bob. Bob saw the whole thing but was not surprised. However, this generator allows for a user to input their own custom name. So if a custom name is entered, it should show that name and not Bob in the silly story. So what I'll do is set up a replace so that the generator will replace Bob with the custom name that the user enters. So I'll head back down to the result function, and in the first if block is where I'll add this in. So I'll target the new story variable and set the value to equal new story. Then use the replace method. And I'll set the first parameter to Bob, which is the pattern, and the second parameter to the name variable. The name variable is assigned to the value of custom name. So here, custom name.value, and the custom name variable is here, and it's assigned to an element with the ID custom name. And this ID is found in the index.html. So we're getting the element by that ID. So if I go into index.html, here's the element with that ID, custom name, and it's an input. So I'm replacing Bob with whatever value is input here. So now I want to test this change in my test.js file. So I'm going to copy this if block and paste it into my test file. I'll first put a bracket around Bob in the story text variable here. For testing purposes. Since this test is all via the code editor and I'm not testing directly in the browser in the actual user interface, I'll need to make some adjustments to the test here. So in the if block, I'll remove the value property from the custom name variable. The custom name variable in the main.js file is set to grab an element. So in the test.js file, what I'll do is I'll just set custom name to Bob. So I'll create it here, custom name Bob, and use that for testing. So now I'm gonna go ahead and run and test this. So I'm console logging the result function again. And again, I'm testing out the new if block to ensure that the name is being replaced from Bob to whatever the current value is of custom name. And of course, if there is no custom name, then it'll just default to Bob. So I'm gonna check the output. So placeholder story, of course, defaults to Bob, and new story also has Bob because that's what I have custom name set to right now. And to test, I'll need to update the value stored there and then run this again. So I'll update the value custom name to cat in the hat. All right, and I'll check the output again. And now I see the update from Bob to cat in the hat. So cat in the hat saw the whole thing, but was not surprised. So now I'll try another name. So I'll remove this name and I'll try Dr. Seuss, run it again. And I can see the change here. Dr. Seuss saw the whole thing. So I've confirmed that this replace is working. So now that step is complete. Next, it says inside the second if block, we are checking to see if the UK radio button has been selected. If so, we want to convert the weight and temperature values in the story from pounds and Fahrenheit into stones and centigrade. So in main.js, this is the if block they were referring to in the code. So if the UK radio button is checked, which is this second radio button, then the weight in the story needs to show in stones instead of pounds. And to refer back to the story text variable, 300 pounds is hard-coded into this variable story text. So they just want this converted to stone for when UK is selected. And it gives the steps for that under number 5. Inside the line that defines the weight variable, replace 300 with a calculation that converts 300 pounds into stones. And then inside the line that defines the temperature variable, replace 94 with a calculation that converts 94 Fahrenheit into centigrade. So I'll start with the first formula, pounds to stone. 1 stone equals 14 pounds. It says multiply the mass value by 14 for the formula. In this case, it's 300 pounds. And the result should be 21. So I'll implement this into the code. In the value of the weight variable here, in the math.round method, I'll divide 300 by 14. And I'm also going to create another test file just to test this out. So I'll take this weight variable, create a test2.js, and then paste in the variable. And then I'll console log this variable here. So I'm going to run the output, and it is 21. Now I'll look up the formula for converting Fahrenheit to centigrade and implement that into the temperature variable. And referencing the story text variable again. So this will be for converting where it says 94 Fahrenheit, converting that to centigrade for when the UK radio button is checked. And this is the formula. 32 Fahrenheit is 0 Celsius. And in case you're wondering, centigrade is another term for Celsius. So in this case, the Fahrenheit is 94, which converts to 34 Celsius. And this is the formula. So it's subtracting 32 from the Fahrenheit value and then multiply the result by 5 divided by 9 to convert to Celsius. So I'll implement this into the code. In the value of the temperature variable in the math.round method, I'll subtract 32 from the Fahrenheit value. And then I'll put that in parentheses. Then multiply the result by 5 divided by 9 for the Celsius conversion. And I'll test this variable as well in my test2.js file. So I'll copy that over. And I'll update the console log to the temperature variable and check the output. And it's the correct output, 34. There was also another part to this step. So it said to concatenate stone onto the end of the result of the overall math.round call for the weight variable. And then for the temperature variable, concatenate centigrade onto the end of the result of the overall math.round call. I'll go ahead and do that for each line. For the weight variable, first I'll convert the value to a template literal. And then add stone to the end of that. And now temperature, I'll do the same, convert to a template literal. And then add centigrade to the end of that. And I'm going to test this as well in my test2.js file, just the variables. And I'll add both variables to console log and check the output. 21 stone, 34 centigrade. And there's one more part to this step. It says just under the 2 variable definitions, add 2 more string replacement lines that replace 94 Fahrenheit with the contents of the temperature variable and 300 pounds with the contents of the weight variable. So referencing the story text variable again, the substrings 94 Fahrenheit and 300 pounds need to be replaced with their appropriate variable that's storing the conversion. So right below the weight and temperature variables, I'll add these replacements. So first, I'll target the new story variable, which is again storing the value of story text, and story text is the story. And I'll set the value to equal new story. Now I'll set up the replace method, and since I'll need to replace 2 substrings, I'll chain it in twice. So first replace and second replace. And I'm gonna place these on new lines. The first replace will be for the weight, which is 300 pounds. The second will be the temperature, which is 94 Fahrenheit. And now I'll add in the second parameter for each of these, which is the replacement. So 300 pounds will be replaced by the weight variable here. So the value here, the stone conversion. And then 94 Fahrenheit will be replaced by the temperature variable, which is the centigrade conversion. And now I'll add this if block to my test.js file and test it out. So I'll open test.js again, place it here under the first if block. And once again, I'll need to make an adjustment to test.js. Since I'm not testing in the user interface, I'll need to make an adjustment to this condition. So the condition is checking if the UK radio button is checked. So for testing the condition, what I'll do is update this to a variable. I'll make it UK checked, and I'll check if it's set to true. And now I'll actually create this variable, UK checked. I'll create it here under the other variables. So I'll set it to the Boolean true. And in the story text variable, I'll also add brackets around the temperature and weight as well to make it easier to see the output. So here, Fahrenheit and pounds. And now I'll run this new change. So again, I'm console logging the result function. And what I'm testing is that when UK checked is true, that it will make the change to convert 300 pounds to stone and then 94 Fahrenheit to centigrade. So I want to make sure it's making that conversion for this condition. So I'm going to check the output. And so here is the original placeholder story where it's 94 Fahrenheit and 300 pounds. And that's before any changes are made. And now with my new output, with UK checked being true, I can now see that it's outputting 34 centigrade and 21 stone. So I can see that it's displaying properly when UK checked is true. So now I'll set UK checked to false to make sure it goes back to Fahrenheit and pounds. So UK checked, I'll set it to false. And so with this being false, that means UK button is no longer checked. And so I'm gonna check the output. And here is the new output. So I can see that 94 Fahrenheit in pounds, the default version, is back. So now there's just one more step left to do. It says finally, in the second to last line of the function, make the text content property of the story variable, which references the paragraph, equal to new story. So going back to main.js, here is the line and I need to make it equal to new story. And by the way, the story variable is at the top, and it grabs the story class, which is a class on a paragraph in the index.html. And actually, I realized I probably deleted that in the beginning of this, so I'm just gonna add it back in. So it's a paragraph with the story class. So in main.js, the value of new story will display as the text content for this paragraph, which is where the story will display. So all the steps are now complete, and the only thing left to do is to demo the silly story generator. So now for the fun part, I'm going to move the code aside and actually test it out in the browser. So I'm going to run index.html. I'll enter a custom name. I'll make it Giselle Tech TV. And I'll start with a US story. I'll generate a random story. And here it is. It was 94 Fahrenheit outside, so Big Daddy went for a walk. When they got to the White House, they stared in horror for a few moments, then melted into a puddle on the sidewalk. Giselle Tech TV saw the whole thing, but was not surprised. Big Daddy weighs 300 pounds and it was a hot day. So now let's see if it generates another story. And it does. So this time it's Father Christmas. Got to the soup kitchen. Giselle Tech TV saw the whole thing. Father Christmas weighs 300 pounds. And I'll click it some more just for fun. So I can see that it continuously gives me a new story. And now I'll try the UK version. Generate random story. It was 34 centigrade outside, so Big Daddy went for a walk. When they got to the soup kitchen, they stared in horror for a few moments, then spontaneously combusted. There it goes again. Giselle Tech TV saw the whole thing, but was not surprised. Big Daddy weighs 21 stone and it was a hot day. Nice. So I see the UK version is working as well. I'll generate that a couple more times and I see it's generating. So there you go. The silly story generator is complete. Actually, one more thing. I need to test the default version as well. So I'm going to clear this out, clear out the custom name, set it to US, generate random story. Okay, so there's the default version. And again, Bob shows when there is no custom name. I'll do the same for the UK, generate, and we can see Bob. All right, now there's a silly story generator, complete. So that completes the silly story generator. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching and see you in the next video.